Hey, John Gilroy here. We're at SmallSat. Some will say we are at an inflection point where a few big players will dominate. Should we start to use the dreaded word monopoly? Listen and learn. Hit the music, Manny.
Welcome to Constellations, the podcast from Kratos, where industry leaders share their thoughts and experience on the future of space business, policy, and opportunity. If you like Constellations, please support us by giving a rating and review on iTunes. And don't forget to share this podcast online to help our community grow.
Welcome to Constellations, a podcast from Kratos. My name is John Gilroy, and I'll be your moderator. Today, we are at the SmallSat conference in lovely downtown Logan, Utah. We'll be talking about something that's on everyone's mind. What are some of the opportunities and challenges in a constellations market mostly dominated by a handful of big players? Our guests are Igor Alonso Portillo and Eliot Nelson from the sales and BD team at KSAT, a leading provider of ground network services and Earth observation services for small sat constellations. Okay, Igor, we're going to start with you. There has been a wave of mergers and acquisitions in recent years, with a few big players emerging as dominant forces in LEO. What are the factors driving consolidation in the market?
Hello, John. Actually, this morning I was reading that Indra, a big Spanish technological company, has bought Deimos, which is basically a small space company, even if it has been in the picture for over 20 years. So indeed, this consolidation and these acquisitions keep happening. But still also, and this I was discussing here with my colleague Eliot, still also smaller businesses, smaller companies pop up every day. So the consolidation, it seems to be that companies reach a particular level when they are interesting for bigger players, then they get acquired. But then again, other new ones keep coming up.
So, Eliot, you think this is kind of just normal, a lot of startups and people kind of getting consolidated? Think that's normal?
Yeah, I believe so. Also, as companies start to mature, we see a lot of vertical integration. Companies start to focus on providing more end-to-end solutions to the market. So, yeah, I'd say it's a pretty natural progression of the market.
So, Igor, I guess some of these driving factors are maybe high cost of entry, competition for spectrum, economies of scale. Is that what you're seeing here at the SmallSat conference?
Yes, indeed. And I like the comment you made regarding frequency or spectrum. I think that's key. And that is a limiting factor where it used to be launch. I mean, still launch, of course, is a very important step. But it seems that SpaceX and other companies have solved that problem now of access to space. But still, spectrum is totally key to get your slot in the business.
Yeah. You know, Eliot, I interviewed ITU yesterday, and they were very focused on spectrum and regulation. And there's so new. I mean, there's going to be so many thousands of satellites in the air in the next 5 years. We're going to have to get more and more familiar with these regulations, aren't we?
That is absolutely correct. And it's going to be interesting to see how things play out with regards to government wanting to keep spectrum for their own missions, but also as governments start to look for more commercial augmentation, how they share that spectrum with the private market.
You know, it's we walk around the conference here, we see new companies I haven't seen, a lot of new companies. A lot of the small companies here, maybe they were employees of bigger companies, and you probably know people in this situation. So we see small companies forming, we see consolidation. And so do you think that's going to impact innovation? You think that it'll be a hamper on innovation or a proponent for innovation?
I think there's absolutely no problem with innovation. I not wanting to do publicity of our case, but just trying to explain. We have decided to catch that wave by having a separate innovation department which actually pushes new ventures. And this, instead of entrepreneurship, but intrapreneurship, or whatever it is called, I think this is another way, again, for bigger companies as we grow, to capture innovation without people having to leave and do their own startup. Yeah,
that's right out of the book of Innovator's Dilemma by Christensen. He said,
yes.
If you have a big company, you almost have to have them physically away from the headquarters so they don't get poisoned by, I guess, bureaucracy or something, huh?
So we have done it a couple of times. It worked fine, but now we actually have a little bit created it formally. Yeah. This concept.
Well, there was a documentary called Wild Wild Space, and it didn't mention the big players. It mentioned smaller players like Rocket Labs and Planet Labs and some of the smaller players out there. But we know there's big players in this market, and they tend to dominate. So is the market dynamic and evolving like it used to be 3 or 4 years ago? But do you think having just a few companies controlling space infrastructure, could there be concerns about access?
So Eliot and I were discussing about this topic last week. The answer, we wanted to answer you with a question. When you mean this domination and few players, are we talking about the SATCOM business, which, again, we have Starlink and Kuiper coming up and so forth? Because if it's in other sectors or in other niche applications, we don't see any domination at all. So we wanted to ask you, are you referring to SATCOM in LEO, or are you referring to other segments?
New frontiers. People talk about the new frontier in space. New frontiers in space data will bring in clientele who are not necessarily interested in images, but in the answers the images provide. Will this help EO companies, as they will be reliant not only on a handful of sectors to survive?
Totally. For us, it's a fantastic thing that more people can use the images, in this case, acquired by imaging companies. The more usage, the better. Ourselves, we also do Earth observation services. So any sensor in space, any extra data point that we can fuse into our analysis is always welcome.
So remember the old stories that they don't buy the drill, they buy the hole that drill, and that's what you're talking about here, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's also with regards to investments in companies that are launching satellites. I think we're going to see investors start to ask more questions of, the product that your payload is delivering on orbit. Who is the end customer that's going to be utilizing this, and why should we give you money to make that happen? So I think in the beginning of the new space market, folks were more concerned with just proving their technology on orbit without having thought about who their end customer is that'll be buying the product.
That's really the question. So Igor, I think if you went to Google Trends and typed in sustainability, you'd see kind of a little graph going up and to the right. So sustainability is a key issue for many young people today, and a key issue in technology sector as well. So let's apply this to space. We're at SATCOM after all. So space sustainability is a key issue that needs to be addressed. Can you talk about sustainability, and do you see your partners and customers actively looking to solve this enormous problem?
Totally. Actually, if you go to Google and type sustainability and KSAT, and that will show you that we have, in the last year, created a totally new department with an executive vice president for sustainability.
Wow.
Which addresses, of course, the problem of having many satellites in orbit, but all the way down to other things like the way we generate electricity with solar panels, the way we recycle into the circular economy, and our customers are actually demanding this from us. They're saying in the requirement list, I need these 20 things, and by the way, there's a final one. I want you to address all of these topics regarding sustainability. So it's not I don't think it's a need, it's a nice to have anymore, it's a must have.
Eliot, I think it's a must have to recruit people, because people are looking at you going, I want to work with those guys, KSAT, and they find out you're involved in sustainability. All of a sudden, that's going to make them maybe lean towards working for KSAT, huh?
Yes, absolutely. And it's going to be interesting to see how the United States follows suit from Europe. We already see that there's a lot of sustainability requirements that a company has to have in order to even bid on programs. So it'll be interesting to see how the U.S. follows behind Europe on that one.
I was preparing for this interview this morning, and I learned that Planet Labs collects 4 million photographs a day. I mean, wow, So satellite imagery and remote sensing technologies are really hitting the sweet spot. So when do you think satellite imagery will become fully integrated into policy decisions and other sections of the economy like the financial sector? Or is it happening now?
I think we saw in the last 2-3 years with the state of the world, and even from COVID times, that satellite imagery is just, a total need. There's no question. And I believe that when you said Planet is acquiring all of these images, they will just become normal. So no more do we count, or do we realize how often, for example, an image on something as simple as Google Earth is updated. And then if you take it to the next level, to the professional level, I think it's just going to become a common thing. We won't think about it anymore. I don't think people think about it anymore in that sense.
Yeah. So, Eliot, I walk around the conference, I meet people. I met a high-level guy from NASA, and he said very few people understand the importance of images like that. Their lives are dependent on it, and it's getting to the point where it's part and parcel of our economy, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And with climate change happening pretty rapidly, we see insurance companies looking for satellite data in order to prepare for responses to natural disasters.
I mentioned the financial sector, but every time you run your credit card, you get that date and time from a satellite. So it's integrated into all parts of our culture today. Igor, what do you think will be a key technology development we will need in the next 10 years to really kick this industry?
I think, and we are seeing a little bit of this now, onboard thrusters, onboard propulsion, and what comes with it also, which is the maneuverability of a spacecraft. And then the next step, actually maneuverability, what for? To do much more precise collision avoidance and be able to accept different risk levels. In the same way, when we drive a car on the road, we have a steering wheel. And, of course, the way I think space has been running until now is like a railway. You have the tracks, and there you go. But I think space needs to go more towards a automotive, like a highway again, like a road, where you just steer. When there's a stop sign, you stop. Of course, you wouldn't do that in space. But you just, that will allow many more satellites to go into orbit and also to properly manage what we right now sometimes think of being as a potential chaos, when there's a collision in orbit or there's going to be debris. Not if we actually have these type of maneuvering capacities.
So, Eliot, when I introduced you, I mentioned the fact that your company is involved in ground network services as well as Earth observation services, Kind of a space identity, right? At some point, do you see some of your customers and partners leaving their space identity behind and moving towards some other kind of business like analytics or telecommunications?
I think that we're actually seeing the opposite of that.
Oh, really? Because it's cool to be in space.
It's cool to be in space, but a lot of technologies that exist today in other sectors of the world are applicable to space. So I think we see a lot of analytics companies actually coming over to the space industry. So a big trend right now that you're seeing is edge computing on the spacecraft. So folks can do processing of their images on the spacecraft before having to downlink a huge ton of data to the ground and seeing if that image is worth keeping or not. So, yeah, I would say it's other sectors, folks from other sectors coming over to space.
I have to say I do agree with Eliot. We discussed this some days ago. But at the same time, I want to invite all our customers and everybody else to download every single byte they have on their spacecraft, because that's what pay our salaries.
Yeah.
So, but I agree. I think processing, whether it's edge at the ground station or even doing some pre-processing on board the spacecraft, is something, which is here to stay.
I have to admit, I agree with you. Space identity is really a big thing. 6 weeks ago, I was at an airport in Kigali, Rwanda, and I saw a woman walk by with a NASA T-shirt. And so, hey, everyone's going to be in space sooner or later, huh? Yeah. Now we got to talk about economics and supply and demand, and this is what it's all about, too. Many companies just seek to serve a market demand, and space is just a means to address this demand. So what kind of demand is out there, Igor?
Demand for information, John, and demand for connectivity, and demand for instantaneous connection. I was reading some time ago that if you were to ask a teenager what would they rather give up, their connectivity or their privacy. Of course, they would never give up their connectivity, the privacy. But if you ask the same question to a 60 or 70-year-old person, they would tell you they're very concerned for their privacy. So I think we're going in that direction where we need and we want ubiquitous, instantaneous connectivity and information.
So, Eliot, I think if you asked a teenager a question, your left foot or your phone, take off the foot.
Take them both.
That is correct.
So, I guess the question is why. So, do you think the private sector is playing as prominent a role as government agencies in shaping the future of space applications for Earth?
Not yet. I think that was my dream 10 years ago. I think that's still my dream, but I think there is no question that still government is running the business here. Maybe they have Earth observation companies haven't found the right business model, or maybe actually they have, but this is a lower process than I thought.
I have a question now about this global dependence on space. I kind of mentioned casually because I talked to the NASA guy earlier. So, Eliot, do you have a sense of how much the general public understands the global dependence on space? I'm sure the people at this conference all will, but if you walk across the street to the 7-Eleven, they may not have any idea that their sales reports are beamed up to a satellite every night, huh?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. You're starting to see SAR images in public news articles, even local news articles. So I would say yes, there's a little bit more of an understanding. However, a lot of folks don't know that, using Google Maps every single day to go to work or go home, that all that comes from satellites. So.
And I think that's what human beings are like. They can't connect the dots, have a hard time.
Correct.
Yeah. So, Igor, this is a tough question to look into the future. At this conference, I couldn't look 5 years out, but let's look 10 years out here. So what do you think space will look like in 10 years? What kind of new disruptive industries will be enabled and cannot necessarily be controlled by one of these two players? We talked about the possible monopoly here, huh?
Well, again, coming back to the topic of continuous information and constant connectivity, I think we will see space relay as a standard way of moving information, and we are actually at KSAT working on that to complement our ground network. And easier and cheaper access to space is there, but there is a question here. The monopoly that SpaceX actually has gotten into, is that a good thing? It's a great thing that they launch a lot of satellites for everyone, but it's still a monopoly, right? So I'd like to see more competition. And then what I'd like to see in 10, maybe 20 years, at least in our lifetimes, is commercial human spaceflight. But not just for a few, but for many more applications. That's what I would like to see, and also we have supported some human spaceflight missions, which is like super fun. Yeah, everybody gets very excited, and every time we do, we get a new T-shirt. So that's I'm really hoping for it.
You get a new closet for all your T-shirts.
Yeah, almost.
So, Eliot, did you bring your crystal ball from Denver? What does your crystal ball say about the next 10 years and disruptive industries that can't be controlled by the big dogs?
Yeah, I would say my crystal ball says that we're going to continue to see more government programs looking for commercial augmentation of services. And that's going to be the exciting thing that allows us on a global scale to all work together for a better future.
Oh, great. I'd like to thank you, gentlemen. I think you've given our listeners a real good idea of what's going to happen in the future, and ground services and Earth observations being flexible and working with these large organizations. You have been listening to Constellations, a podcast from Kratos. I'd like to thank my guests, Eliot Nelson and Igor Alonso Portillo from KSAT.
Thank you for having us, John.
Thanks for listening to Constellations, the podcast from Kratos. If you like this interview, please subscribe, tell a friend, and give us a review.